Welcome to Summit 2020 by the MacArthur Foundation. The Summit is a platform where leaders, innovators, and pioneers share their perspective on how to best build an economy that is resilient and regenerative by design. My name is Stella Chavin from the business team, and I'm delighted to be hosting this session today to explore how some of the world's largest companies are playing a leading role in redesigning the system based on the circular economy principles. For this conversation today, I'm joined by Lucas Jopa, who is Chief Environmental Officer at Microsoft.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So, Lucas, despite the very challenging environment this year, we can say that Microsoft has been pretty busy setting a range of ambitious commitments, such as protecting more land than you use by 2025, becoming carbon negative by 2030. And super recently, a few weeks ago, you announced also going zero waste by 2030. So how do you see the circular economy framework help you do this?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the circular economy framework really does kind of encircle all of the topics of sustainability. I think, to your point, we're focusing on carbon, ecosystems, waste. We have one more announcement yet to come. We're setting our commitments on water. And the ideas behind the circular economy, designing out waste and pollution, keeping materials in use as long as possible, and then regenerating natural systems. Those three principles really drive so much of the work that we're doing in all of those areas. You mentioned our zero waste commitment. We're looking to be a zero waste company by 2030, diverting more than 90% of our waste from landfills. But the way that we're doing that, I think, is the most important bit. It's, we're building new circular centers in all of our data centers to ensure that, over 90% of all of our servers and componentry are reused and repurposed and recycled. We're moving away from single-use plastics. We're putting in place 100% recyclability of our surface line, our computer lines. And so those aspects of designing out waste and then keeping materials in use as long as possible is critically important. But I think that regenerating natural systems is really critical as well. And so if you look at our ecosystems goal to protect more land than we use, that's in large part working towards regenerative natural systems. When you look at the way that we're doing our carbon negative commitment and some of our water work, you'll see a lot of investments in afforestation, reforestation, soil carbon sequestration on lands that are being put in regenerative agricultural uses. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing to ensure that the principles of circularity are what are not just kind of guiding the goals that we want to set, but are actually guiding the implementation of the way that we're achieving our goals.
Right. Yeah, I guess we all know that crises have this way of accelerating trends, right? And the COVID-19 pandemic has been no exception. It really has transformed the way people live, work, as we do right now, and connect thanks to technology. And so as a result, there's clearly demand that has grown for, as you mentioned, data centers, cloud services, and all kinds of IT assets. How is Microsoft going to balance that business growth that is inevitable while meeting all these transformational commitments?
Well, I think it comes down to the way that we look at the world and our place in the world. I think, the most powerful thing that I've heard our CEO, Satya Nadella, say this year, kind of really at the start of the COVID crisis, was a comment he made where he said, for Microsoft to do well, we need the world to do well. And that really shines a light on our overall business philosophy. And it says something about the scale that we operate on and the dependency that so many people around the world have on our products and services. And so we're really looking to, sustainability for business growth in three areas: really growing our current business, developing new lines of business, because I think what the circular economy is going to bring forth really are new lines of business in order to achieve those principles that we've already talked about, as well as fostering broader economic growth. Those three things all have to happen. And I believe that, you know, as we move towards a more dematerialized society, which I think is incredibly important if we are going to decouple environmental degradation from economic growth and the overall growth of the human and improvement of the human experience, then digital technologies are going to play an increasing role, right? Software is the most malleable thing that humans have ever invented. It can be, you know, you can completely design how waste from lines of code. You can repurpose it. You can reuse it. You can basically just, you know, erase the surface and write again. But what do you produce with the software services that you're providing? That's really where I think we have a lot of opportunity, both to, as I said, develop new lines of business, but also to foster this greater economic growth across the world. And in part, one of the reasons that as a component to our carbon announcement, our carbon negative announcement that we made in January, we committed to deploying $1 billion in a new climate innovation fund to invest in new businesses and new technologies that have the potential to reduce carbon, remove carbon, not just through direct carbon innovations, but also through things like better waste management, better materials management. One of the first investments that we made actually out of that fund was in Closed Loop Partners, a fund dedicated to investing in this space. So look, we need those technologies to make the world a better place. We also need those companies to prosper and to grow. We want them to be successful, right? And so that's ultimately where I think the economic growth and the improvement of Earth's natural systems is going to come from.
Right. I want to come back to those tools and softwares that you're using later, but first I want to come back on that collaboration aspect that you alluded to a couple of times, where, you know, Microsoft is that huge company with a footprint worldwide. What are the challenges that you currently cannot tackle alone, and how do you see collaboration playing a key role? Who are your key partners, be it in the public or private sector, to build back better and create, you know, both that growth while meeting those commitments?
Yeah, I think you said what you can't do alone. I mean, basically everything falls in that category for us. The things that we are more in control of are, you know, our own operational footprint, the way that we source, manufacture, operate, and then manage our products and facilities, you know, at end of life. But even then, we need the broader ecosystem to offer the solutions that we can then either procure or use. And then we also need to be able to do this in a way that's replicable by others. I think one of the philosophies that we hold pretty dear whenever we think about setting these commitments is that if we are setting commitments and then implementing or achieving our success through a method or a process that's not scalable, that doesn't allow others to follow in our lead, it's not affordable, it's not it's too technologically advanced, etc., then that's not ultimately a win for us, and it's not a win for the world, right? I mean, us achieving our sustainability goals and nobody else achieving any sustainability goals. We may be a very large corporation, but we're a drop in the bucket at the scope scale of the broader problem. And so really everything that we do, we take an eye towards collaboration around. In fact, you know, back in January, we made our carbon negative commitments. In July, we provided a 6-month update. And one of the big components to that update was a new coalition, a Transformed to Net Zero coalition with 9 leading companies around the world that really are dedicated to not just figuring out how to set net zero goals, net zero carbon goals by 2050, but are dedicated to working together to put in place the business plans and the playbooks for how to implement those work streams inside a business so that other companies who want to follow but don't necessarily have the skills, the expertise, or the resources to figure it out on their own, that we can help accelerate the process through the work that the coalition does.
Would you be able to give us an example of what this coalition is doing? What one example to shed light on how you can go about this?
So we just got started. I think one of the things that we're really focusing on is proper ways to account for carbon, and particularly what's called scope 3 carbon, the carbon that's associated with your supply chain, your downstream value chain. That accounting process is one that corporate America and corporations all around the world are waking up to as an extremely important quantification that we're going to have to do in order to set and achieve these goals. But it's still very much kind of the wild west of carbon accounting in that scope 3 space. And so working together to understand best practices internally, how to align different mechanisms to lower scope 3 carbon emissions through things like Microsoft has an internal carbon fee that we're committed to deploying against our scope 3 emissions. Those are all sorts of best practices that we're looking to, of course, share amongst ourselves, but more importantly, put in shareable form for companies and organizations all around the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of where you can collaborate. As you talk about scope 3 emissions, those who are coming from supply chain partners, the more removed from your operations, the less data you have and the less transparency currently there is. So this is clearly where you need all the partners to come together and bring the data. And actually, this is a good segue for my next question to you. I saw that in your biography 3 years ago, you were part of the founding team, or you founded yourself, Microsoft AI for Earth program. So this is an initiative dedicated to capturing data worldwide with sensors to be able to prioritize and adopt technology-led solutions to tackle some of the world's environmental challenges. Could you, and I know you've touched upon this already a little bit, but could you tell us why do we need data so much to build back better? And what tools Microsoft is making available to tackle those global issues?
Well, look, I think it's really hard to know where you're going if you don't know where you are. It's really hard to know where you're going if you don't have a map to get there. Data provides all of those things. In the waste space, we know just how opaque that market and those systems really are. Where did the materials come from? Very poorly known. How long have they been in use? Often not tracked. What happens to them in their next use phase? Something that very few people are able to shine any light on. And so, that's just one particular topic. AI for Earth kind of set out, as you mentioned, about 3 years ago with a pretty audacious goal. And that goal was to use technology to change the way that we monitor, model, and then ultimately manage Earth's natural systems. Because at the end of the day, we talk about the fact that we live in an information age, this fourth industrial revolution, but that's a really narcissistic definition of an information age. We know a lot about ourselves. We know still very little about Earth's natural systems that we depend on to support our societies. And so when you think about the scope and the scale of the information that we need to understand at a planetary scale, it's clear that you need technology to help digitize that, make sense of it, and provide, assistance to the human brain in optimizing decisions about what you should do with it. And that's really what AI for Earth has set out to do. In fact, back in April, we kind of entered phase 2 of our AI for Earth strategy and committed to building out what we're calling a planetary computer, a planetary computing platform. And that's really about collecting up some of the world's largest, most important environmental data sets, and then connecting those data sets to both the people that require them and the technology that's powerful enough and scalable enough to make sense out of it. And so we've been working on a lot of different projects, whether that's, remote sensing and land cover mapping and agricultural optimization, all the way down to biodiversity monitoring and species tracking, either through new sensors or through remotely deployed cameras in natural areas around the world. We're really looking to try to build the foundations of a global environmental sensing system. I say foundations because it's not Microsoft that's going to build the ultimate end user solutions. It's for Microsoft to build the platform that empowers individuals and organizations all over the world to achieve more. That's, of course, our corporate mission, but in particular, to achieve more in building solutions to problems of both people and the planet. And I can't think of a more important mission than to figure out how to deploy technology in pursuit of better monitoring, modeling, and then ultimately managing our natural systems. They're the systems that provide us the license to exist, the license to operate, and the license to grow. We need to do a better job of managing them. We need to respect those natural resources and the limits, the finite limits that some of them represent. And technology can help us do that. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah. Lucas, thank you very much for sharing more around how Microsoft is changing its own operations to be more circular, but also being a true enabler to progress towards this circular economy transition. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this session of the Foundation Summit 2020, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you.